Hello, we are back reading Focusing-Oriented Psychotherapy highlights. So here we are. Pick up here. Let me just copy this so I can drop that wherever we stop. So, as with before, I'm just going to read through these and try to understand them, riff on them, put it in my own words. So yeah, here we go. Dead end, unchanging feelings. So I guess last time, let me just check. We talked about the first dead end, yeah. Dead end discussion, yeah, okay. So now, dead end, unchanging feelings. Okay, so people in therapy often have strong emotions and gut feelings that are quite concrete and experiential. They're not just talking or intellectualizing. Yet despite the fullness of their emotional content, it does not change. They feel the same feelings over and over again. So one thing I want to call out is experiential. So we now know, or I now know, I recorded a video this morning reading a paper from Gendlin from 1957, so it's an old one, an early one, about what he means by experiencing. So experiential now, I have a little bit more grounding in what that means. Right? Experiential is about putting your attention into what's going on, the life process, right? The non-conceptual, the felt, intricate meaning in your body. So anyway, so people have strong emotions. They're not just intellectualizing, which is the whole previous dead end. But it's just the same emotional roller coaster over and over and over again, the same emotional triggering, right? The same thing, same sort of thing happens. You get the same sort of angry triggering, for example, and it never goes away. It never changes. You just consistently get angry about the same shit. I've been there. Yeah. I mean, not just anger, there's anything. The steps of actual change are to be found neither in mere verbal discussion, nor in flooding experiences, nor in mere emotional intensity. Dead-end feelings arise and remain unchanged, most commonly because they seem quite clear and final. There is no murky edge to them that asks to be explored. So one thing that stands out to me in that is that he writes that they seem quite clear. Not that they are, but that they seem to be. So it makes me wonder, it's a question of the person's awareness, right? Because there is, I think Gendlin, I think it's fair to say that Gendlin would argue that there is always the murky edge, always. It's always there to be explored, but it's a question as to whether we put our attention towards that. And if we don't, for whatever reason, then we won't explore that, and it will seem to be just the same thing over and over again, and there will be no further steps to be explored because there's no murky edge, there's no felt sense. It's just the emotion, right? It's not a felt sense to be pursued and clarified and articulated and symbolized, right? That's kind of what, where did I put it? I think I put it on Twitter recently about how I was reading another book by one of Gendlin's proteges, basically, Neil Friedman, and he was saying that, Gendlin's PhD is in philosophy. He's a philosopher, and but he got drawn into psychology with this question of, I believe it was, how does experience become symbolized? Let me see if I can find it real quick. Eugene Gendlin is a philosopher who was pulled into psychology by the question, how does raw experience get symbolized? So that's what focusing is. That's what thinking at the edge is, in essence, I would say. Again, I haven't really explored thinking at the edge too much, but it's taking raw experience, again, experience as described in the paper that I read this morning. So it would be just the most recent video before this one. And articulating that in some way, not necessarily through words, right? But having a symbol for that raw, murky experiencing, that felt sense, having a symbol of that, whether that means an image, a sound, like tears can be a symbol, like an expression can be a symbol. Physical expression, I mean. And then obviously, words too, right? Putting it to words, that's the process of focusing. You find this thing, you find the murky edge, you find that felt sense, which is currently vague and inarticulable, and you find a way to articulate it until you have the thing that articulates it accurately as determined by whether it matches the felt sense, right? That's so you're checking back with your felt sense. And if it does, then now you have symbolized that and you've brought it in and sort of become an object for you. And now that thing has been conceptualized, and now there's further murky edges. And so it's a step by step by step process. And again, Gendlin wrote a process model, so the process never ends. Life itself is a process. So there's no sense in any of this of coming to the end of it. It's just a journey the whole way. Movement is fundamental. So anyway, in this, he's talking about, dead-end feelings basically have no murky edge to them. So there is no murky edge to be explored and thus to be pursued, no next steps to take, no further process. Just stuck. The process is stuck because you're not aware of the murky edge. Every bit of human experience has a possible further movement implicit in it. Human experience is never complete. It is never just as it appears. It never consists only of already packaged things. Yeah, again, this is a lot of what he talked about in the paper I read through this morning. That we are not contents, and to think of ourselves as contents is to freeze the life process. Right? We never are a snapshot of us. To talk about content is to talk about an object, is to talk about a concept, which is not in process. because we are living, we are organisms, living organisms, that our process is essential to our being alive. We are not static. There is always further movement. Our heart, right? It has to be pumping. The blood has to be flowing. And every other little thing in us, it's moving always. It's in process. And if it's not, something is probably a little bit wrong. It is never just as it appears, right? So if you were to take, I guess I said this morning in the other video, like, yeah, you can dissect a cadaver and it is what it appears. It's just a frozen body, but that's not an alive body. If it was alive, it would be in process, it would be moving, but it's not anymore. Right? Or to take a snapshot, like the body that you read about in a textbook on biology or whatever, anatomy. If you have like a diagram of biology, it's not just as it appears, right? The diagram of our body is not a complete picture. The appearance of it in the picture is not a complete representation of what human experience is. It's a snapshot. Of course, as Freud said, this is in itself a great development. To have touched something experientially many times does liberate energy, and it does engender enlarged perspective and new behavior. Nevertheless, Freud missed the little steps of change that can occur inwardly in what one touches. Either this process had not occurred in his analysis, or perhaps he did not describe his analysis well. I can't really speak to this, but I think it's pretty straightforward what Gendlin means. Just that, yeah, so like, even if you're only talking about your psychological, emotional, mental experience as if it were content, right? It's like, I have this thing, this experience, this way that I am. I have these highly triggering emotions, right? And you touch those and you release them, and maybe, you, whatever you do, you have a cathartic experience and you let that emotion out. Like, yeah, it does create space because you're not full of that intense emotion anymore. But it doesn't mean that those processes that Gendlin talks about of articulating and symbolizing step by step each murky edge of experience, right? That hasn't necessarily occurred just because you've had a catharsis. But yeah, I don't know Freud very well, so I can't speak much about that. The change Freud looked for was limited to a coming to awareness. No change in the content itself was expected. The content was thought to be perhaps an infantile wish or something that had occurred in the past. Freud held that the content does not change, but in coming to awareness, it loses energy. The ego gains this energy. Right, so it's like you have a bunch of things in you that are highly charged, and you go in and you release the charge of those things. Okay. But the things themselves don't change. They remain the same. They just are not full of intensity. And obviously, that changes things, right? To have all those things in you not so intense anymore, that's going to change the entire system. So it's not as if no change comes of that. But there may, in a theoretical way, with Freud, again, I'm only going off what Gendlin's saying here, in a theoretical way, those things themselves don't change. They remain what they are. They just have a different energy, right? And this is kind of where, for example, like I get sometimes a little iffy about when internal family systems gets taken too literally. Because I think you can get a little stuck in being like, I have this part and I have this part and I have this part, and like those are parts that I just have and that's it, right? I can work with the parts, but the parts don't really evolve. And the nice thing about focusing is that it can use the parts language, but you don't have to hold on to the parts as if they are like these beings that are there forever, right? Like my inner child, my little exile, right? If it was pure, strict IFS, it'd be like, okay, well, I have this exile and it's always in exile, and maybe it's like no longer burdened, but it's still there, right? But it's like, or it could just be like, okay, well, that bit of yourself, that thing in you that was burdened in that way, like, it's going to evolve into something else, and you don't need to conceptualize it as an exile anymore. You don't need to conceptualize it as this being in you anymore. So I think focusing in that way allows a lot more flexibility or allows for a lot more evolution to occur internally, because you're not beholden to concepts of what is inside, right? You're not necessarily the contents of what's inside. You're not stuck with, oh, there's my internal family, and like that's who I live with now and forever. Theoretically, we want to understand how experience and events are not fixed packages. That is, how change steps are even possible. Yep, okay. When something changes, we break it down into smaller pieces that did not change, that were only rearranged. When we can locate these unchanged elements, then we feel we understand, we have an explanation. Okay, so in this case, he's talking about how we think in general. Like, this is an example of what is not the process model, right? The process model is an alternative to this way of thinking, where it's like everything is little bits that you build and put together and connect, right? And you arrange and rearrange, etc. But everything starts as individual bits, individual pieces, individual atoms, units of matter, units of experience, whatever. But you start with units and then you just stack the units together and rearrange them and shit. That's what a process model is providing an alternative to. But there are other kinds of explanation that do not require this assumption of packaged pieces or units that remain the same. For example, we can explain an event by showing how it fits into a larger picture. Mathematics and logic work only with fixed units. In multiplying or in logical deduction, one must not throw in extra units or lose any that one had at the start. But experience and situations do not come in neatly divided and fixed units. Any situation can be cut up in a great many different ways to get very different logical inferences. One can always notice one or two additional elements so that what seemed a logical proof falls apart. That is the reason why logic does not give necessarily correct conclusions about human experience. If you slice the facts a little differently, logic is overthrown. All right, so I talked about this morning too in the last video. Everything by everything, right? Everything in our past unfolds into everything that comes next. And that everything in our past is literally everything. It's not sliced up. It's just everything. It's all of experience. And you can go back and you can look at it and you can slice it up in different ways and say like, oh, there was this event and this happened and this story, but you're slicing it up and you can slice it up in different ways, right? Any situation can be cut up in a great many different ways to get very different logical inferences. All right, I was saying like giving the example of writing a history of something, right? A personal history even, right? Telling the story of some time or event or a theme in your life. It can be done in an infinite number of ways. You can slice up that story, draw that narrative up in so many different ways, describe that experience or that event in so many different ways, right? And say like, oh, well, this was the cause, or that was the cause, or that was the key factor, or that was the key factor, depending on kind of what the question is. In what way are you looking at? What's the question that you're taking in as you look back on your experience? And that question will kind of define how you cut up that undifferentiated mass of everything that's come before. Nothing past or present is ever packaged so as to have only one shape with fixed results. Therefore, nothing is ever quite finished. All events and experiences can be carried further, and when this happens, there is also a change in what they had been. Yeah, that's a big thing. I don't think it's really come up yet in that as you go through that process that you go through in focusing of symbolizing that murky edge of experience, right? And that can be something that you do about what's happened in the past, right? You can think about your past and think about some experience, some memory, and you can have a murky edge to that experience and to that memory. And as you explore that, it becomes symbolized and clarified and articulated in a new way. And then the meaning of it changes for you, right? Maybe you see like, oh, wow, like I relate to that memory and that experience in a whole new way. Or, whoa, suddenly I see that it's connected to this other thing in a way that I'd never realized before. Or like I used to resent the fact that I had that experience, and now I realize that experience was essential in getting me to this other part of my life, right? And so the experience itself has been changed in your conception of your history. So as you carry further and go through that process of symbolizing, clarifying, articulating that murky edge of experience, what that thing was initially changes because it is brought into a different light. Your experience of it changes. Nothing is ever quite finished, right? Like an experience that happened 10 years ago, you right now you might remember it in a certain way. It might bring back certain emotions. It might have a particular felt sense, but when you explore the murky edge of that felt sense about that experience 10 years ago, new things get clarified, right? And your relationship to you change, right? And so you're then reflecting on that experience from a new perspective. Literally, your somatic reality has changed. On a physical level, you have changed. So your point of view is different on it. And that can happen continuously, right? You can reflect. Again, that's what I was talking about with writing a history, even a personal history of some event in your life. Like, you can reflect on that forever and interpret it and think about it in like an infinite amount of ways. It never is a final thing that has nothing further to explore about it. It's never quite finished. Emotions and memories from the past come as part of the present person. The past changes in a new present. Even if the past is wholly implicit and unnoticed, it can be carried forward into a new whole as part of the process of present experiencing. Events of the past are not thereby falsified retroactively, as was done in the Soviet encyclopedia, but their role in the body can acquire a new function. So emotions and memories from the past come as part of the present person, right? So I have a memory and an emotion about a past experience, but they are here now in my present person. And as the present changes, right, as I go through the focusing process, for example, and clarify those steps, the past changes. Right? Because the past, again, the past is just everything. It's the undifferentiated everything behind me. But your conception of the past can change. What it means to you, how it lives in you, how it comes back into you as part of the present can change. Their role in the body can acquire a new function, right? So like that thing that happened 10 years ago, maybe I've been fighting it or running away from it for the last 10 years, but suddenly, I spend some time with it and it acquires a new meaning for me, and suddenly I'm like, oh shit, actually that was so important and it functions for me and my life and my current living in a totally new way, in a way where I'm like actually appreciative of it, maybe. Right? It acquires a new function. It plays a new role in your living process. You have changed and it has changed. Okay. Every experience and event contains implicit further movement. To find it, one must sense its unclear edge. Yep, pretty much just summarizing everything we've been talking about. Change hardly ever comes in one step. Rather, it consists of many small steps and now and then some large ones, right? So, yeah. As you explore the murky edge, as that symbols for that experience come, sometimes it's big, but a lot of times it's just small, bit by bit by bit. Felt shifts are not necessarily massive, life-changing things, but they're just shifts in your experience, right? Oh shit, like my body's relaxing. I have a little bit of relief now that the knot in my belly relaxed. That's a felt shift, right? That is a change. That's a step forward. So yeah, I'm gonna stop here for now. It looks like we're getting into a new chapter, so I'll pick up next time. Oh fuck, what just happened? Okay. Stressful. I don't want to fuck up all my highlights. Okay, thanks for watching if you watched, and till next time, have a great one.